Hey, this is Rachel Hatfield, and I'm here with Kenneth Harris. He is the owner of Harris and Harris Counseling. He is a LPC supervisor in the state of Arkansas and in Oklahoma, and he works with children, adults, adolescents, couples, and families. And I am going to talk with him today about relationships and the impact of negative, unhealthy relationships on a family unit. So I'm going to let him introduce himself. Here we go.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Kenneth Harris. I'm a licensed professional counselor, licensed drug and alcohol counselor, and addiction specialist. Also have some other certifications as a national certified trauma therapist, and I'm also a certified school counselor. So I've had Harris and Harris Counseling for about since 2014. I started out in Oklahoma after working for an agency there. I started Harris and Harris Counseling at my home doing community-based services. And then I moved over here to Fort Smith, Arkansas, probably about 5 years ago, and I kind of worked for some agencies. And recently, as of August of last year, I went to work for myself full time with Harris and Harris Counseling. But I've always worked part time for a long time. And then I decided to go out on my own. So now it's just me and my wonderful one room office trying to make a difference.
All right. Well, that's exciting. I know we're all just trying to make a difference and share some information. And that's the whole goal of these conversations that we're having, that we're going to be doing recorded videos to help increase awareness of mental health and help people that are stuck at home have a little bit of a positive thing to go to whenever they want to watch something on YouTube or the internet. So yeah, we talked about just kind of discussing relationships. So what would you like to discuss about them?
So one thing I would say is relationship counseling is something I've always been passionate about. And of course, they do have LMFTs who are licensed marriage and family therapists who actually get to use the term marriage counseling. But I believe anything that we do pretty much has a relationship, whether it's a work relationship, a school relationship, a friend relationship. But one of the ones that I think is the most powerful out of all the relationships we have is an intimate relationship or a dating relationship. And if you look at some of the shifts that are happening in dating relationships, they're becoming more and more complex over the years. And so for me, being a single parent and actually, dating, getting to know people and different things like that, it's kind of one of those deals that how do we even create a healthy relationship in 2020? What are some of the things that are, is the relationship one of the roots of having a healthy family? So I believe if you have a healthy dating relationship, does that go into a healthy marriage? Which, if you have a healthy marriage, does that lead into having a healthy family unit? So dating relationships have always just been a passion of mine, and just kind of seeing some of the changing patterns of, monogamy and just whether or not people are even considered dating anymore. And I think a lot of people have questions, but more people are just more worried about, we do have this, pandemic going on as far as with the COVID-19. So people are putting more of their personal issues on the back burner. But I truly feel like dating relationships with dating websites and so much pressure to date and so many unhealthy things that are out there now. I just really like to talk about how to get back to the healthiness of what a relationship should look like. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today. It's just getting feedback, and hopefully if a lot of people see this video, are there some things they want answers to? Because I think that's kind of, with if you think about like school shootings and all the things that take over the news, I think just dating and relationships and healthiness in this area has been put on the back burner. So that's my passion, kind of moving forward with it.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. So I am one that does talk a lot about marriage counseling, like you said. And a lot of people who don't understand the counseling world is that unless you hold that licensure, you really can't advertise that you do marriage counseling. We have a lot of specialized training in specific relationships and working with the families in marriage. But even though someone may not be an LMFT, which is what we're called, does not mean that they don't work with couples and or
Yes.
individuals with relationship issues, because we aren't islands. We are connected through systems, and everything that we do has an impact on someone else. So we do have to take that into consideration, and that traditional counselors, social workers are working with individuals in relationship issues. And that's okay. We can definitely work on getting some training if you've never done the systems work in graduate school or
Yeah.
your formal training, then after you graduate, most of the time people will get some additional training to help them expand some of their understandings of systems and relationships. I know that you mentioned that you use a certain program that you had some training in that you really like, and you want to talk about that?
Yes. So I received two trainings that I think if there's some therapists who read this, they should really take the time to go through the Oklahoma Marriage Initiative. And one of the programs I got certified in is called Within My Reach. And Within My Reach is something I actually use for both married couples and people who are just doing some premarital counseling. And I use it for people who have been in unhealthy relationships and want to learn how to be healthy. But it's actually supposed to be used for people who are single. They have used it for some women who have been in some domestic violence situations. They use Within My Reach to teach them how to develop healthy relationships. So Within My Reach is a good program. It's about a week training, and it's very awesome. And one thing that's so cool about the Oklahoma Marriage Initiative is they give you all of your materials that you need to run a group for free. So say if a lot of these workbooks that I have that are Within My Reach, they send me 20 of them, and then you actually do a group with 20 individuals. And every time you get done with a class, they'll send you new books. So Within My Reach is a good one. And the other one I'm certified in is called PrEP. It's Prevention and Relationship Enhancement Program. And this is for people who have been married for a while and need to figure out some new and positive ways for communication, how to work through some of the root causes and unfinished business within their marriage, and how to deal with some of the changing things that change in their environment that affect their marriage long term. So PrEP is a really good one. It's also another week program, which was kind of weird for me because I did the PrEP training, and then a month later I did it Within My Reach. So they were very good programs, very informative, and once again they prepare you for it because they give you all your materials that you need to conduct that program. So it's really good.
Sounds really interesting. So it seems like people are pretty receptive to those programs that you've worked with.
Yes, I think a lot of people when they come in, I think the biggest transition for and you can shed some light on this when working with individuals, it's harder for them to come in and talk about their dating relationship than it is to talk about individual depression. And sometimes talking about relationships, because I don't know if they feel it's a reflection on them and their self-esteem, or if it's something that the other person does not like about them. But I've noticed that some people really don't like talking about like problems at home, but they're okay with talking about like money issues or if they have anxiety. But when you start asking about relationships at home, some people don't like to talk about that. What have you experienced when it comes to?
I'm not sure if I have the same experience. I mean, I think all counselors are a little bit different in their techniques in that
Yeah.
sense. Because of my systems training, that's kind of where I go first. We always discuss relational things, and it may just be a different way that we take it. I know that sometimes people are guarded in relationship in discussions about that. Most of the time, I find that people are guarded when discussing their parental relationships.
Oh, that's
And
good.
that's
Actually
one thing that I found in my practice. But the intimate relationship seems to be something that I work a lot with, just because I am an LMFT, and so we talk a lot about that. Even whenever people are coming in for me individually, I definitely discuss a lot of intimate relationships. So I'm not sure if I have the same experience on that.
gotcha. So that's why I asked because like it's always because I'm here and a lot of the clients I have, whether or not they come through referrals for whatever source, and it's somewhat different. One of the things that I kind of want to do with this video is when it comes to relationship counseling, or when people come in for, marriage counseling, whose idea is it most of the time?
Well, it depends. As a marriage therapist, well, in our ethical code, we talk a lot about how we're not supposed to do individual work with people we're doing marital work with. And so I have a lot of people who will come in individually, male or female, and they want marital counseling, but the other partner isn't on board for that. And
There we go.
yeah, and so that's okay. What I do is I try to encourage them at first, and I tell them, okay, so I can't be your individual counselor and your marital counselor. And so we take a session or two to try to figure out what it truly is that they're wanting to get out of counseling. And then we might do some encouragement and talking with the spouse if they're on board or want to do that, add a couple sessions later or something. And then I might even say, okay, well, I'll start out with your individual counseling. And if your partner decides that they want to come in for marital work, then I'll refer you to a colleague that I know that does great marital work, and then I'll continue your individual counseling. And that seems to be pretty receptive.
Yes.
People aren't really pushy when it comes to that. They understand that we have ethical codes and
Yes.
responsibilities that we have to follow. I do like to work a little bit individually with the clients whenever I do the marital work, but they understand that the relationship is the client and not the individual person. So I only have like maybe one session that I will spend separately with the individual, unless something comes up and we're like, okay, it's pretty evident that we have to have another individual session, but
Yes.
it's still things that can be discussed in the marital relationship in that marital work.
So one thing I kind of want to do is get it to where the majority of calls I get is individuals that do a program called, EAP, Employee Assistance Programs. A lot of individuals will come, and most of the time it's somewhat males, and they will call and say, well, I would like to come in for relationship counseling because, pretty much they were told to.
Mm.
And I want to make it to where that it's universal to access. It should be very very easy and feel comfortable with it. I mean, like if you're not happy in a relationship, most of the time I think, and like I said, you can jump in with this, is whether or not if males are unhappy in a relationship, do they normally keep it to themselves and don't go seek help? I just want to make sure that, I feel now to be healthy in the sense that we both, I think males and females have to be equally open about their feelings and provide adequate communication so they can both have I would say, a healthy relationship that involves being equally driven emotionally to connect with each other. So yeah, I just really feel like now it's kind of one of those deals that reaching out for help is when when people come into my office to say, well, this is our last hope. And I like to correct them and say, no, this is your first step to success. Because if you look at it as it's a last ditch effort, how does the perception of the counseling process work? So I think that it's, coming to marriage counseling or coming to relationship counseling is not a last hope. I think it's a first step towards success. And so transitioning into that, I didn't know if that was something you experienced, as whether or not most people are for you did say a while ago that some people are forced to come, but how do we, help people work through that? Like this should be the first step instead of the last step. This should be the first step to access.
I think that's another thing that you're right. I mean, people come into counseling for marital work usually whenever they've tried and exhausted everything else. And sometimes someone might be checked out already. And
Yes.
that's one of the first steps is to find out where everybody is and find out what everybody's intentions are. And even if they feel checked out, it doesn't mean that they can't come back around and feel invested again. But it's clear that that people come to marriage counseling and they're not always on the same page. And
True.
so it is important to figure that out and make sure that we're all rowing the same direction in that canoe, because we can't be rowing
Yes.
separate directions and get anywhere.
So the one thing I would say is, as when people come in for relationship counseling or marriage counseling, there's various issues. There's various issues that people come in for, but I think one of the most prevalent problems that people come in is coming in for overcoming past relationship traumas. And people can be married for 5 years, 2 years, or 20 years, and some of their past relationship traumas still affect them. And then they come up at some of the most unique times. So I would think, what do you think are probably two of the relationship traumas that affect people long term?
I'm not sure what you're at. So
Relationship traumas mean like being cheated on.
Oh, yeah. Infidelity is definitely one. There's also, of course, abuse issues. There's there are so many things that happen in
So
relationships
many,
that
yes.
will carry over into other relationships, and to make sure that all things are resolved, and they're not always going to be resolved immediately. But what you said about how things come up. At really odd times, like you're not
Yeah.
expecting it to come up.
Yes.
Yeah, unique times. And so what I tell people about that is that most of the time our brains will go into survival mode and we'll be fine for the duration of a stressful event. But once our bodies feel safe and able to relax, and our bodies are able to say, okay, that's over, your brain starts to process that information. And then we start to notice that we have a little bit of a regression, and they're like, I could have expected to fall apart 5 years ago, but why now? I'm safe. Everything's good. I have financial stability. I have a relationship. But what's happened is your brain is ready to process that information. And so it comes out, and there's can be some projected anger or fear or emotions towards the new partner whenever it's not necessarily the new partner's issue. It
Yeah.
might be something from the past relationship.
So one thing I would say is, can you consider uh, some of the hurtful things that people go through? Can they be labeled as traumas? Like if you cheated on, can that be labeled as a trauma? And that's one thing I think as a mental health professional for me is when people come in and they're like, if you read, we do have the clinical definition of what a trauma is. And then when they're obsessing over it, it causes them to have anxiety. They have constant patterns of flashbacks. Kind of one thing I learned in some of my EMDR training is that, someone getting cheating on and experiencing a high level of disloyalty, that it can be a trauma you can process in EMDR. So I don't like people to actually use that term, but if it's something they can really work through, but I think that's also something people have to realize is how powerful some of these things that you go through before you start a new relationship would be. Is that something I should address before I get into a new relationship? Because I think a lot of people sometimes they think, well, I'm over that. I'm good. I'm okay. And then something comes up to trigger them. And so is that something that's resolved if there's certain things that trigger you? I think one of the most common things that trigger people now is cell phones. Cell phones, how are cell phones linked to cheating and unhealthy relationships? But I think that's one thing is having people be able to identify what is their true relationship, what is their true, not necessarily trauma, or what is the thing that is their blind spot, or the one thing that they're holding on to that they don't know they're holding on to until something triggers it. So moving forward through those kind of goes into something I like to call relationship echoing. And to me, relationship echoing is, are you still carrying over unhealthy behaviors from a past relationship because it's something you should have done in your current relationship? Are you carrying something over in your new relationship that you should have done in your past relationship? So for example, if the new relationship, you're always arguing about, well, you're just always trying to control me. And then in that relationship, the person's, I'm not trying to control you. Or is that something you're still echoing from your past relationship when you were being controlled, but you're fighting to say, I will never go back to that? Are you echoing that over? So I think sometimes people don't know or realize what they're echoing over because they're kind of blind to it. And the reason why I keep saying blind and hidden spots, I use the Johari's window quite a bit. And when I do any type of therapy, any type of presentation, I always talk about the Johari's window. And the Johari's window has 4 boxes. It has the open box, the hidden box, the blind, and the unknown. And sometimes in relationships, if we bring some things over that are unhealthy, we're blind to them because we don't see them, but other people do. Just because we don't see them, does that mean they do not exist? So relational echoing is something that I think a lot of people, if they're willing to take constructive criticism, they can work through. But I think the first thing is identifying the problem.
I agree. Identifying the problem is a big step. Sometimes you don't know things are going to be a trigger. And so,
Yes.
And so that's something that I also think that both partners, if you know that maybe there was a previous relationship that was a serious relationship, both partners can be open and understanding to growth, because you can't always predict that future and understand that it's going to happen. So to say that you're going to be able to resolve all issues from previous relationships is kind of unrealistic if you want to continue to date. But it does mean that you need to be open to processing and open to reflecting on that whenever it comes up, and think, okay, is this something that's currently an issue, or is this something coming from my past? And seeking help whenever that pops up, because sometimes it's okay to talk to your partner about those things and be open about it. But if it's an issue that you feel like you need to work through a little bit before you go there, and if your partner isn't understanding about it, then it won't hurt to seek professional help about it first and say, how do I address this with my partner and what's happening?
But some people will ignore some things that not ignore, what word am I looking for? As far as like, we tend to self-regulate and we'll say, oh, that doesn't bother me that much, until, like you said, Rachel, until you don't know until it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that does come up, how do we define in 2020 what's the healthy way to address these things? For example, building trust with someone, is it healthy or unhealthy to have Life 360?
Mm.
And so somebody who's, whether or not they're okay with building trust, somebody will say, well, okay, well, Life 360 is just an app that if somebody's driving, they get in a car wreck, I can see where you're at. But somebody who's been in a controlling relationship is going to look at that app as, that's a way for you to track me. Mm-hmm. So is technology, like I said, whether or not it's a double-edged sword. If I can see where you're at and what you're doing, then that means I can trust you. Mm-hmm. Or I can use this technology to control you. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I think that what people have to think about is what's healthy. Because so I have couples who will come in and say, well, oh, my friends, they use Life 360. Is that healthy for them? But that might not be healthy for you. Mm-hmm. So I think learning now is like, how are we teaching individuals to step back and to identify and start to apply what's healthy for their relationships? Because I think there is some universal language when it comes to healthy relationships. I think trust is one, but I think that how you build that trust should be personal to you and your partner at that time. Mm-hmm. So have you had any issues with people building trust using technology or?
Mm-hmm. Technology is definitely a window for infidelity. We have it creates a lot of window opportunity or open opportunities, open windows, like I like to call them.
Yes.
Windows of opportunity. The problem is that it's at your fingertips and people can just always have access to you. I am a very technology friendly person. I love technology, actually, too much. I have my phone with me all the time. I'm always on social media. I'm big on making connections and networking. Okay. And I have other counselor friends that are just like, oh no, that's not healthy. That's this. But honestly, it's okay for me. I balance it. It's not a big deal. Yep. But it goes back to understanding yourself and your boundaries and knowing what your responsibilities are. And that's the same thing in a relationship.
Yeah.
When you're talking about Life 360 and you're talking about tracking apps and things like that,
yes,
you really need to think about the entire relationship. Is this relationship, what stage is this relationship in? What has happened in the past of this relationship? Has there been some infidelity that we need to have complete transparency about? what are the intentions of each partner? Why are we using this? I personally am fine with having any type of transparency. If there was a tracker on any of my stuff, I'd be fine with that, just because my husband and I have been married for 13 years and we are very open and transparent about everything. He's the same way. We have access to each other's stuff if we need it. But we haven't ever had a history of any type of infidelity. Whenever you have infidelity, trust is shattered to the point that people start to question the reality and the structure and the stability of the relationship. When
Yes.
that happens, there is a lot of issues and questioning.
Yes.
And there's a lot of guilt and shame that goes into that, so much that there's a lot of defensiveness that pops up whenever people start to talk about transparency. Fear, lots of things, lots of different emotions come up. So
Yes.
it is important, like you said, each relationship and each partner has to be open and talking all the time about what their intentions are, what their expectations are, what they hope and dream for their future of this relationship. And they have to be on the same page.
Yes. So one thing I would say when it comes to transparency is I think it's vital to every relationship. And transparency is kind of one of those things that if you're thinking about defining, and that's one thing, like, as we have more of these discussions and as when people come into my office, defining healthiness, I think really has to pertain to what do you want in your relationship that works best for you.
Mm.
That's something I try not to really push on people, but it's something that I think has to be brought to light about, because a lot of people will bring things from, well, this is what my parents did. And so if they have different background, this is what my parents did. I will tell them you should always take into consideration what healthy relationship things your parents have taught you, but what is going to work best for you.
Mm.
And a lot of people like that because they're kind of like, well, okay, Ken, is there a script that we have to have to build a healthy relationship? No, it's open to building what you want it to be, but then also, are you putting the healthy things that come in there? Transparency, to me, I truly think has to deal with. There's a term that I use a lot with people, but I remember I watched a video about it. It's finding someone who is equally yoked or like-mindedness when it comes to building a healthy relationship. So this is where I think a lot of the dating apps are getting people in trouble, is because you can look at a picture, but can you tell somebody's integrity and what they think of and how they think, how they act, with their morals, with their values from a picture? So now, to me, is that necessarily false advertisement, or are you just picking somebody based off their looks?
Mm-hmm.
So equally yoked, to me, really goes into, does that person have the same morals and values when it comes to work, when it comes to religion, when it comes to parenting, when it comes to where they want to live? And so I think equally yoked, it can be, the term can be used interchangeably when it comes to like religion or whatever, but I truly feel that equally yoked is, are we selecting partners based off of what they bring to the table and how that's going to enhance us as individuals? Or are we basing partners off of, well, this person just looks good standing next to me?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think now is, how are we building healthy relationships with like-minded people? And are we open to learning new things about ourselves when we meet someone new? So how do we teach people and to find these equally yoked individuals, and not based off of, I've been single for 5 years, so we should get together because I'm tired of being alone? Is that person equally yoked to you? And this is something I will always ask couples who will come in and they've been married 5 years. The first question I will ask them, how well do you know each other? And it's unique for them to look at me and say, I don't think we really know each other. I don't think we really know each other. And so then I do an exercise. I do a worksheet with them. I do this little exercise with them. Well, I ask them what's their 10 favorite things, or like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite dessert? What's your favorite movie? To me, these are basic things. Like, you remember, we're in high school, like, oh, what's your favorite color? And we do those wonderful dating things. Do you know that couples who have been married 20 years wouldn't even know their spouse's favorite color? or has it changed over time?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So Kirk Cameron had he had that, God, what was the name of that series he had? Fireproofing Marriage.
Mhm.
He said one of the two of the biggest things that break down relationships or marriages are, one is selfishness, and two, that we stop learning each other. So as you're getting to know someone, I think somebody who's equally yoked to you is somebody that you're actually learning a lot about. That you actually know what their favorite color is. You actually know where their favorite vacation spot is. You know what their views are about money. That's one of the things that when people come in, they argue about money. And I'm like, did y'all not know this before y'all got married? And no, can we never have those conversations? And
Mhm.
so now I feel like healthiness comes with transparency. But adding to that is, am I dating someone or am I going to start this life journey with someone who thinks on the same page as me? And I think that's what we kind of get past.
And that kind of comes back to understanding your partner intimately. And I work with couples all the time on this and talk about how intimacy isn't sexual intimacy. It's
The ability to feel
intimacy
close.
in
Yeah.
all ways. Understanding them during conflict, understanding what their buttons are and how to help them to de-escalate whenever they're starting to escalate, having enough respect to allow that to happen and not
Yes.
continue to push those buttons. Understanding partners as a friend, what their fears are, what their concerns are, what their hopes and dreams are, and then figuring out what your common hopes and dreams are. You don't have to have every single thing in common. You don't have to have the
Yeah.
same political party in common. You don't even
Mm-mm.
have to have the same religion in common, okay,
Nope.
to have a
Mhm.
healthy relationship.
Yeah.
You just have to be committed, understanding, loving, kind, respectful,
Yes.
and honest with what you need and want with your partner.
The one thing I would add to that would be teachable.
Mhm.
Me and you, we both have degrees, and we work with a lot of people who are well educated, and some people, whether or not they have education, they're still very intelligent people. But I think that one thing is, kind of going back to the Johari's window, is the open book has to do with the facade, and sometimes the facade is what we show people, and what we want people to think about us to put our best foot forward. But I think when it comes to being teachable, it's probably one of the most transparent things you can do. I think that if people learn the universal language of what can I do better, and that's learning how to take constructive criticism, because if you're not doing something correctly, or your partner feels like, hey, that didn't work out as great, and it's okay to say, hey, what can I do better, because I'm being teachable, and whether or not that kind of goes into vulnerability, that's a totally different topic and conversation for growth when it comes to teaching people how to be vulnerable. But I think being teachable is kind of one of those things that if I work with doctors, lawyers, whatever education I work with, the one thing I tell them: when you come into this office, you have to transition from being a doctor into being a client. So sometimes in relationships, we have to learn how to transition into being teachable, because therefore there's some things we just don't know about that individual, or there's some things about ourselves. So I think being teachable is a really good thing that I would say add to healthy relationships. Is there's going to be some times where you have to step back and just listen. Now, whether or not you're a talker, say I'm a talker, and I feel like I know everything in a relationship. Sometimes I've had to learn how to be. I have to, close this and open my ears and be teachable.
Mhm. Yeah, that's definitely important. Understanding ways to learn about your partner, about you in the relationship, and how it affects you and all of your dynamics and family dynamics, like we talked about before.
Hmm.
Figuring out how blended families
Yes.
are impacted by new relationships, how to identify whether you're in a healthy or unhealthy relationship.
Yep. And I think that also one of the things I think you like, I would say, and I don't know if you would agree, is can you have a healthy family without having a healthy marriage or relationship? How are families impacted by
Mhm.
healthy relationships?
I think that circumstances are all unique in that situation. But one of the things that I always encourage my partners that I work with and my parents that I work with is that they are modeling what healthy relationships are looking like. So it's very important for them to work hard at establishing the healthy relationship, at putting the relationship first and showing their children that this is what that looks like and that this is what you deserve. You deserve someone that treats you this well, because that is part of parenting, teaching your children what they deserve in life and how they're supposed to be treated, and
Yes.
and what that looks like, so that they can try to model that. That doesn't mean everyone does it, and it doesn't mean that someone that didn't have that can't have a healthy relationship. And it doesn't mean that the family can't be healthy in a way. It just means that that component of the family, maybe the relationship, just isn't there. And that person, like the children or someone else, may have to learn alternative ways to develop healthy relationships versus not from their parents. So
I think one thing that kids pick up on when it comes to whether or not there's healthy relationships is communication styles. I think that if your kids see you yelling, what are they going to do at school? If your kids see you shutting down and walking off, what are they going to do? So I really think that, them seeing that type of communication at home is really going to be impactful, short term, long term. And so I think communication really has to be, to me, one of the forefronts in shaping your family unit. If you're trying to model how you want them to have a healthy relationship, how powerful do you think communication is?
I think it's a key to relationships. I think that, John Gottman also has the 4 horsemen of apocalypse of relationships, and stonewalling is one of the number one things that causes certain destruction, is what they say. And if you don't have communication, you don't have a relationship. But communication isn't always verbal, okay?
Okay.
And so there are ways to communicate with your partner without saying words, and they can be negative ways and positive. It is important for us to make sure that we have open, honest, gentle communication with each other, and not aggressive communication, but also responding to the communication of our partners. We all have bids for connection, even from our kids. So even if it's just a simple hello, making sure that we respond in a positive manner, because ignoring those bids can lead to that stonewalling and contempt and just all of it.
I think one thing that is the passive aggressive communication and the minimization of negative communication. So like, say, for example, if somebody in the house calls somebody else fat, and then that person is really hurt by that, but they minimize it by saying, oh, I was just joking. Also passive aggressive, being just dropping slight negative hints, and then but not addressing it as in full. I think that type of communication, to me, is probably the most damaging, because it's the one that has the most chameleon effect within a family unit or within a relationship. I think that now communication is becoming one of the things that I think people most ask for is transparency in communication. And I think a model I teach people is, I would rather tell you the truth and hurt you than to lie to you and make you look like a fool. That's something that I teach my couples is, also, I think is lying more important than your integrity. I think your integrity being intact should be your first goal in having a healthy relationship. But I think, and that's what I like to do, is get people's feedback on, what have they learned as kids, because what they've learned as kids might not fit into their relationship now. And so how are we teaching adults to let go of something that's been, instilled in them to have a healthy relationship? So, some, behavior modification and reprogramming, I think is very difficult, but I think it's something that, when it's brought up to individuals, they kind of say, okay, maybe that's a behavior I need to unlearn.
Yeah. Working with families and couples are definitely, it's rewarding and it's challenging at the same time, because there are so many things that come into the equation. And so, I mean, there's so many dynamics for sure.
Yes. And I do love the complexity of working with families and relationships, because I think that I think a lot of people now, they say everything starts in the home. I never used to believe that. So I'm not going to say everything starts in the home, but I think a good foundation of what happens is carried from the home.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
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 So good conversation. Good
And
video.
thank you so much for joining me today. And
Awesome.
if any of you liked what you saw today, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video and leave a comment below about something you want to hear about later. Thanks.